So our speaker tonight is Donnie M, and his beautiful wife Heather is going to introduce him.
Hi, Heather Mosier, recovered alcoholic. That's weird. So I have the honor of introducing my husband. He's a pretty cool guy. We've been married 5 or 6 years, something like that. He always remembers better than I do. So we met at a little A&A club in Katy back in 2017. Now, he did not look, I knew that I had to marry him, but he did not look then like he does now. He did not have that amazing beard. But I love the beard. The beard is my requirement. But back then he had he had this goatee and he had this long mohawk that was like slicked back, and he was in his motorcycle cut. He was covered in tattoos. He just looked like the kind of guy that my dad would be really disappointed in me for picking. So I'm like, him. He's the one. But the reason I knew it was God, on the back of his big book, it was a different big book, but we had matching stickers on the back of our big book. If you go to a very specific sponsorship workshop, you get this sticker. And it's a Bill Wilson quote that says, "Our chief responsibility to the newcomer is an adequate presentation of this book program." And I had that same sticker on the back of my big book. And so when I saw that he had that sticker, I was like, that has to be God, right? Like, I got to marry this guy. In fact, I think my dad actually loves you more than he loves me now. When Donnie asked my dad for my hand in marriage, my dad's an old country dude, and I've been married a few times. So he loves Donnie so much that he was like, absolutely, take her. He's like, it's a great burden off our shoulders, I tell you what. He was just so excited. Our first year was a little rocky, and he'll kind of explain more about that in his story, but I feel so blessed to be married to this man. He treats me like a princess. He's my perfect partner. We get to do AA. He loves Alcoholics Anonymous, and he loves God. And so I think you'll get a lot out of his story. So with that, my husband, the bearded national treasure, Donnie.
Well, I don't know how to follow that up. Hey y'all, my name is Donnie Mosier, and I'm a recovered alcoholic.
Hey Donnie.
My sobriety date is April 23rd, 2013, and for that I am truly, truly, truly grateful. I never knew that you could live the kind of life that you guys and God have given me today, and I certainly didn't know that back in 2013. I had no idea what I was in for. First of all, I want to thank Carrie for asking me to do this. It's an honor and privilege to be able to share my experience with you guys. On that note, I want to say that, a lot of times when I go to speaker meetings or I'm in a regular meeting, a lot of times I need to surrender my own personality. I need to surrender my ideas and my ideals so that I can be present for somebody else's experience. And what I'm going to share tonight is my experience. It's just what's happened to me in the last 11 years, how I've built a relationship with God. And I'm going to talk about things. If I say something tonight that your sponsor disagrees with or the big book disagrees with, discard what I've said. Right? And I want to read this out of the book to get started. On page 29, it says, further on, clear-cut directions are given showing how we recovered. These are followed by 42 personal experiences. Each individual in a personal story describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. And that's what I want to do tonight. My establishing of relationship with God has been quite rocky. I can easily say that I have probably done some of the worst things in my life in AA, not when I was drinking. So I grew up, let me say this too, I'm always a little nervous when I get up here. I get nervous like right before I come up, but then I hear my own voice and it soothes me. And I'm comfortable. It's my favorite. I grew up a bit of a thug life. I grew up in a really rough part of town. You guys may have heard of it, called Katy. I would say I grew up behind bars, but they would be the gates at the front of the subdivision. I grew up a normal, for nowadays, a normal life. Parents divorced when I was 12. My mom was a drug addict. I am one of 5 kids. 2 of them came later in my life. I grew up with 2 brothers, really. That's what I grew up with. And I'm the only alcoholic. My mom died a drug addict. I'm the alcoholic. The other 2 guys got away scot-free. And so I tell you all that to tell you this. It wasn't that my parents divorced, and it wasn't that we grew up dirt poor, and that me and my younger brother had to have jobs at 16 so that we could keep the lights on because my mom spent all the money on pills. It was that I got this gene unlocked. I've got this alcoholism thing, and my 2 brothers escaped it. And I don't think anything that happened to me as a kid is a contributor to that. And I've met people in the rooms. I've met silver spoons. I've met people that had nothing. I've met just everything in between. And the one common thing is we've got this allergy and this insanity to alcohol. I'm no different than most people that come up here. I started drinking as a teenager. I really liked the way it felt. And I wanted to do it as much as I could. Now, for the old timers in the room, you guys may remember a little place called Spring Shadows Glen. So I was, I started drinking at 13. I really liked it, started smoking a little, stuff. Everything was great. And it was the rehab, revolution. And my mom took me to a therapist, not because I was an alcoholic, because I was a bad kid. I remember in 7th grade slinging a chair at my teacher, my science teacher. It wasn't because I was a drug addict or alcoholic. I was a bad kid. I always had an authority problem, but that therapist recruited me for rehab. And so I went into Spring Shadows Glen at about 15 and a half years of age. This is going to date me, but it was 1987. And back then they didn't have insurance regulations. And so I was there for a year in rehab. And it was the best year of my teenage life. They wanted to know how I was doing and how I was feeling and what bothered me. It was all about me. It was the best year of my entire teenage life. I loved it. I am a chameleon. I cannot tell you how many different things I was in my teenage years. Let's see, but when I went into rehab, I got to be all of them. So we had this guy named Jason, and he had a mohawk, and he rode a skateboard, so I was a skateboarder. And they had another guy who wore this black hat and all black clothes, and I remember his name was Derek, and he drove a Fiero, and he was this dark goth guy, so when I was with him, I was dark goth. You know what I mean? And so with each person I would hang out with, I would just assume their persona, because I was definitely not good enough for you to like. I was definitely not good enough to have anything you want. And anytime I entered a room, it was always what do they think of me? Are they judging me? I'm sure they all hate me, and they're just ready for me to go. And that is my life up until about, 16 and a half. Because I sat in that rehab for a year. I was in an adolescent unit, but we had AA meetings there, and I smoked a lot of cigarettes there. Then you could smoke cigarettes in meetings, and it was great, just chain smoke the whole meeting. And I was immersed in this, but I'm telling you this so that you understand, I was clueless. I got out of that rehab and without thinking twice, just picked up a drink 2 weeks later after my dad spent about $80,000 in the insurance and all that stuff. None of it fazed me. I wasn't an alcoholic yet. But I did have a problem with honesty. I remember sitting in a group one time, and this guy named Danny, and I'll never forget him. And Danny says, all right, guys, this is your chance to be completely honest. I want you to tell me the deepest, darkest thing you've ever done. Let's just be authentic and real here. And it goes around the room, and these guys are bearing their soul. And it comes to me, and I'm like, I got in this fight, and I stabbed a guy. had never been in a fight. But that's how dishonest I was, because what was going on in my life was there was no way it was interesting enough for anybody. And I was just oblivious of what the truth was. I had no ability, to be honest. So I went on about my life. My drinking accelerated as it does. I've always been nervous. I've always had this just kind of like obsession about everybody in the room and what they think of me. And that's paralyzing. But when I was drinking, I'm calm. I talk to chicks. I'll start a business with you. I'm a philosopher, and I know everything. Right? I still sometimes know everything. But it did something for me. It was a solution, and it escalated. And so I got into my career field at around, I don't know how old I was, probably 22, 23. And I started making money, which really, really allowed me to drink when I wasn't working. My drinking accelerated enough that when I got into my lower 30s, I began drinking when I didn't want to. I began getting in trouble. Heather always makes fun of me for this. I'm going to say it anyways because she's stupid. When I was 38 years old, I went out. I have to be careful how I say things. I went to a show with a woman who wasn't my wife, and we were drinking, and on the way home, I got arrested. Now, what I got arrested for was possession and unlawful carry of a firearm, and I spent a week in jail. And every time I say possession, my wife goes, "It was weed, Donnie. Be real with people," right? But it was the first time that I had a consequence in my drinking. Somehow I had escaped for years and years and years, drunk driving, blackouts. I had escaped it all. And around that time, I began wanting to not drink or drink less because the consequences began getting worse and worse. And I remember being, Thursday afternoon was like happy hour day. I'm in IT, and it was like happy hour day. And I remember, like, I had gotten, not in trouble, but my boss was like, "Hey, when we go to happy hour, you gotta, like, tone it down a little bit." I don't know what that means. Tone it. I don't know. I show up, I drink, and he comes out. That's all there is to it. But I remember, like, thinking around 3:30, like, oh, it's happy hour day, and I'm excited, and work is now off the table, and I'm excited it's happy hour day. 4 o'clock, you know what? I'm going to head on over early. You know, I've worked hard today. But you know what? I got that reprimand, and it was Jaeger. Jaeger is the problem, and I am not drinking Jaeger today. I'm not doing it. And I'm driving over to the bar, and I'm like, not doing the Jaeger. It's the problem. And I walk in there, not doing the Jaeger, and I walk in, and I get 2 Coronas. I sit down, and I got 2 because you don't know when that shady waitress is really going to come by. You want to have a backup just in case. But when I got drink number 1 in my body, and that physical allergy began to take effect, before I got the second beer, somebody comes up, they're like, "Hey man, you want a Jaeger bomb?" I'm like, "Yes, let's do this," without thinking twice. And I promised myself, I'm going to go have a few beers, and then I'm going to go home. And comes one more night of leaving when they ask me to politely because I've removed an article of clothing or done something really stupid, which happened unfortunately quite frequently. I don't know what it is about me and alcohol, but I do really, really dumb things. I'm the entertainer. I'm the alcoholic entertainer. I like to take over the whole crowd, right? Things got really, really dark in the end of my 30s, and when I say really, really dark, I was confused when I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was really confused. I thought that alcoholics lost their job, lost their cars, lost their house. They were their houses and they were alone under a bridge somewhere. That was my idea of an alcoholic. And I didn't lose anything. I still had a house and cars, and I had a wife at that time that kind of liked me, and a kid that would kind of talk to me. And so I just never pictured myself an alcoholic. But I would lay in bed at night, and I would think, you know, if tonight's the night, if I die tonight in my sleep, I'm okay with that. I'm not a suicidal type. I'm not a depressive type. I was just tired. I just really didn't want to do it anymore, and I couldn't keep it up. You know, back then I had an RV, and I would go camping, and I cannot, so here's a little known fact about me. I can't burp. I don't know why. God gave me alcoholism, took away burping. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I can't burp. So when I would drink, if I'm drinking like Crown and Coke, I'd get a stomachache. Or if I drank, I couldn't eat, right? Because most alcohol mixers have carbonation. And I remember going to the grocery store because I'm going to go camping, and I've got the RV ready, everything's ready, and I'm in the liquor aisle, or the beer aisle. And I'm staring at the beer, the cases of beer, and I had promised myself that I was going to go camping, that I was not going to drink this weekend. And I couldn't not buy the beer. With every fiber of my being, I didn't want to buy it. I really didn't. I was fed up. And I remember walking out of that grocery store with 3 cases of beer in my cart, and I just had tears rolling down my face. Because I knew I was going to do it again. And there was absolutely nothing I could do to stop it. I am completely grateful that God let me go through whatever it was I needed to go through on my own, which included hypnotherapy. I tried to hypnotize the alcoholism away, and that, don't waste your money there. It does not work. I would usually pick up something to drink on the way home from that. I'm grateful that I tried everything I could, that I tried every which way to stop drinking before I ever met you, before I ever came to the rooms, because by the time I came to the rooms, I was desperate, I was alone, I was tired, I had had my butt kicked, and whatever you had to offer, I was willing to do it. Because when I got here, you guys seemed pretty happy. I thought you were full of it at first, but you guys seemed pretty happy. So the guy that 12-stepped me is this guy that I grew up with, and he was feisty. As I said, I'm not a fighter. Now, I've tattooed all my arms, and I have to look tough. It's more of a defensive armor. But my buddy, he was the fighter. And so when there would be a fight happening, I'd like to just make sure he was in front of me. Over the arms, yeah, egg him on. And he comes back in my life, and he's calm. He's peaceful. I haven't seen him in 10 or 15 years, and this is not the guy that I grew up with. I couldn't figure it out. And he starts asking me about me, and he starts asking me, how am I doing, and how am I feeling? And I'm like, I'm okay, what are you doing? Why are you so different? And he started to share with me, not the amount that he drank, not what he drank or what party favorites, none of that. He started to really explain the desperation, the loneliness, the despair, the 4 horsemen that we read about. And I got down with it. I was like, yeah, keep going. What else you got? He hooked me. And so he took me to my first meeting at the park. I don't remember it. I don't remember a thing anybody said. I remember feeling like I wasn't sure if that's where I belong. Have I really sunk this low that I got to go to this thing called AA? And let me tell you something. By the time I went, I did not even remember going to Spring Shadows Glen. There was no memory of it in my late 30s of being in AA or doing AA. And so it was literally, it felt like my first meeting ever. My second meeting was at what would become my home group for, 3 or 4 years, which was the Woods Road group in Brookshire, Texas, a little outside of Katy. And I went there my second night sober, and I just fell in love. I fell in love. I am so lucky that God let me go through what I needed to before I walked in that door. And I'm lucky that the first door that I walked into that really grabbed me was this group of people that's a lot like this. I started coming to this club, I don't know, October, I think, September, October. I come to the Thursday night big book study pretty regular. And I gotta tell y'all, I don't go to that. What's that other meeting they talk about? Something about morning time? Whatever. Are people even sober if they're going to a meeting that early in the morning? Anyways, we won't talk about that. Anyways, I'm recovered. I hit the 6:30, the 6:30 big book study. But I want to tell you that what drew me into Woods Road is what I've found here, and you guys were like an oasis for me. You know, we go through these stages in Alcoholics Anonymous, and we grow, and we back off, and we grow, and we back off. And I had gotten tired of, like, the club scenes, you know, the one in the Post Oak area, or the one in the Spring Branch area. Like, and what happened after COVID is I wasn't hitting a lot of meetings. I've always sponsored a lot of guys, and for me it was like sponsor a lot of guys, hit a meeting a week, and I'm good. And before I started coming here, what I started realizing that I was missing was you. I was missing the fellowship. I was missing the love, the openness, and I didn't even know it. And I was talking to a guy telling him, I got to do something. And he's like, hey man, I know this big book study, I think you dig. And so I just wanted y'all to know that you guys filled a place in my heart that I didn't even know I was missing. There's so much love and peace and contentment in this room. Like, you guys have welcomed me with open arms, and I just want you to know that. And that's what I found in the beginning out at Woods Road, is I fell in with these people that were just kind of doing it. They were sponsoring and working steps, and they pulled me immediately into the group conscience, which I don't recommend if you're newly sober. I would caution you, unless you really want to work on traditions, I wouldn't do it. But they pulled me into all of that. And I was desperate, and I just, okay, I'll do it. Like, whatever you have. I remember every Wednesday night, we'd go to Denny's after the meeting, and that became a staple. Like, it's what you do. After the meeting, you go to Denny's. Everything else in my life around that, right? I worked the steps fairly quick. My sponsor was like, hey, we got a week or a month. If you've got the illness that I have, we're going to do this thing quickly, and we're going to get through it. And you're going to get to work sponsoring. I got through in about 2 months. I got my first sponsee at 90 days. God help him. I don't know whatever happened to him. Pray for him, honestly, every now and then. But I was fully involved in all of the activities of Alcoholics Anonymous. Fully involved. There was a little problem. I had a little problem. Heather and I, we've both been married a few times. My first wife was very much into church, and we got married in a church, and we had the church thing going, and she liked, when we had a disagreement, to punch me in the face. That was her thing. Enough to where I finally left. I could not. It's kind of a weird thing to say up here as a guy, to talk about I am the recipient of physical violence, but I was raised in a home where me and my brothers never beat on each other. I definitely wouldn't hit a woman, right? But that tainted me. It tainted me for church, because I've always tried to wonder, like, why was I so against that whole thing? What was the deal there? And what it tainted me against was God. And so by the time I hit the rooms, I'm a 20-year atheist. I absolutely do not believe there is a God. He doesn't exist, and anybody who says he is wackadoodle. Well, now I come in the rooms, and you guys are talking about God. And I'm presented with a clear decision to make. And like a lot of people, when I read it on the wall, I'm like, I got a dilemma. But I just did what y'all said. I went through the steps, and I got through it. But I struggled with that. I struggled with that for the first year and a half of sobriety. And I'm obstinate. I don't know if you've picked that up yet or not, but I'm a little bit obstinate. And for the first 8 or 9 months, when everybody would circle up and say the Lord's Prayer, I wouldn't. I just shut my mouth and put my head down. I didn't try to make a spectacle, but I wasn't taking part in that voodoo. I wasn't doing it. Until, right? It's always until. That Wednesday night Denny's session that I would sit in there, my buddy Matt still one of my closest friends to this day. I met him the second day in Alcoholics Anonymous. We're sitting in a Denny's, and I'm like, I just don't understand the God thing. How do I make this happen? And I probably was making him crazy, because I'm just trying to figure out how to make this thing happen. I got to get the feeling. And he finally just goes, Donnie, stop. You're not. There is absolutely nothing you can do to make this happen. But what you can do is the steps laid out in front of you. What you can do is work the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'll bet it will happen to you. And that's my story. I was probably 18 months sober. I had a job where I'd show up early. I will never forget Terry. Terry was my manager. And I'd show up around 6 a.m. and we'd sit in her office and chat for an hour. My life was not real good. There was some things creeping back into my life, some dishonesty. I was sort of going, we build up principles when we come in, and I was backsliding on those principles. And I was really struggling with the God idea. I made too big a deal out of it. I probably, if it was up to me, I would have probably still be on my second and third step today, arguing like physics with you. Right? That's how bad it was. And I'm sitting there with Terry. And I just remembered, I don't know how God came on. We started talking about it, and she says, she goes, I want you to read this book. And I'm like, all right, whatever. And she gives me this book called The Shack, and I took it home that weekend, and I read the entire book in a weekend. And something happened. For some reason, I was okay saying God. Like it was the first time in my life where I was actually okay saying, there is a God. There's something going on out there, and I'm okay with it. And God has a sense of humor. Because this happened to me in December of 2011. No, 2010, 2011, I don't know, dates don't matter. It happened to me in December, and in January I got laid off. And I remember being on my way home, and I called my sponsor, and I'm crying. And I said, man, I feel like an idiot. I just got laid off, and I'm crying about it. And he goes, well, you're crying about it because you're not a psychopath. It's okay. He goes, listen, you got 48 hours. Get the crying out. But you got work to do. And he just put me to work. Not out there. In here. So I happened to get a severance, and I had some money, which is crazy the way I used to spend money. I had some money, and I decided to take 90 days off. I had worked like a maniac. I worked through my daughter's teenage years. I worked through marriages. I worked through everything. Forsake it all for money, right? But I took 90 days off, and I focused on Alcoholics Anonymous, not finding a job. My sponsor told me, he said, you have two choices here. Two choices. You can walk through this 90 days full of fear, anxiety, regret. You can walk through it with all of that. Or MFer, you can walk through it with style points. And I was like, what? He said, look, you're working with a net. God's got your back. You don't have anything to worry about. Now go help his kids. And so over that 3 months, I sponsored, I can't tell you how many dudes. I'm hitting 2 and 3 meetings a week. I'm volunteering. I'm doing all kinds of things. But I got to tell you, there were days that I woke up and I remembered that I had about $40,000 or $50,000 debt and no job. And panic would hit me. And those were the days that I would just, in my head, repeat all day long, sometimes 1,000 times a day, God's got it, God's got it, God's got it, God's got it. I do believe today that nothing happens by mistake. I don't think that God laid me off, but he sure used it as an opportunity to draw me closer. So I got laid off on January 23rd. 3 months later to the day, I'm sitting in a meeting with my sponsor. It's a Wednesday night meeting, and I'm like, all right, I'm bored. I've done everything I need to do. I've redone stuff at the house. I got to go back to work. And he said, good, go back to work. And the next morning I get up, open my laptop, get my resume ready, and I've got an email. I've got an email from the company that I work for today. And for a long time, I thought the moral of that story is if you do God's work, he'll give you a job. But when I look back, the moral of that story is that I had nothing to worry about. That if I truly believed that God exists and God had my back, I had nothing. I had a choice how to walk through that valley. And I got to tell you that for 90% of it, I walked through it with style points. And it was probably one of the most spiritual things I've ever been. I can be incredibly spiritual without a job and nothing to do. And being around no one. Just ask me. Right? So I went back to work and I got busy and it was my dream job. It was a job that I always wanted. It was like the pinnacle of my career. And then I happened again. Within 3 years of that job, I wanted to kill myself. And I don't mean literally. What I mean is this. I hated everyone I worked with. I hated the company. I hated their decisions. I hated their management styles. I hated going to the office. I hated everything about that job. This is my dream job that I had at that point worked 20-something years toward. And at that point, I'm with Heather, and I'm the first stable guy she's been with. You can believe that. And I tell her, I'm like, hey, so I don't think I want to do this anymore. I think I'm going to become a barber. And she's like, I hate you. Yeah. In 2017, I nuked my life in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I nuked it. And this is never easy to talk about, but I feel like I'm not sharing enough of me if I don't. You know, Bill talks about it as the woman who understands. And see, what happened between that 2-year period of having that amazing God moment and 4 years of sobriety is me. And even though I was doing the things of Alcoholics Anonymous, I wasn't living the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I had been married a long time, and our marriage wasn't good, and it's not that fault, and it's not her fault. I take 100% responsibility for what happened, but I found women who understood, and they were in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I guess the most embarrassing thing is not really that I did that. What's the most embarrassing thing is that I did that outside the rooms while I was beating you with this book in the room. That's the most embarrassing part. Is that I would be in the rooms screaming about how you got to do this and do that, and this is the book, while living a completely unprincipled life outside. And when I nuked my life, I left collateral damage everywhere. When I nuked my life, one of the women that I was messing with was in this little fellowship group that we rolled everywhere. There was 10 or 15 of us. And I'm talking 3 years of every Saturday night, we'd go to our meeting, and then we'd go to dinner, and then we'd go to cigars at my sponsor's house. And when I nuked it, that fellowship broke up. People in the rooms were like, Donnie did what? What? And I was so embarrassed I had to leave Katie. I couldn't go to meetings out there anymore. People had found me out. All my secrets were out. And for the first time since I got sober, I found myself in my pantry at my ex-wife's house, staring at a bottle, knowing that I was about to drink it. And it wasn't because I was obsessing, it was because I was so miserable that I knew that nothing was going to clear it as fast as that bottle. And I called my sponsor and I got honest, and I'm like, I'm in a lot of trouble. And I went to his house and I told him the truth, and he fired me. Thank God. No, I know the looks. I know the looks. Thank God he fired me. Because he had been my sponsor for 5 years and I hadn't been honest with him in 3. And the only commodity we had was honesty. And I hadn't been honest with him. And he wanted me to have a different experience, and thank God he did. He fired me on a Saturday night, and Sunday morning, I called this guy Anthony, who, in a general way, knew what was going on in my life. I texted Anthony at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and I said, man, I'm in trouble, and I think you know why, and I don't know what to do. And the return text was an address, and it said, be there in 15 minutes. Only Alcoholics Anonymous. And we met at his office, and we got to work, and we started working the steps. And we never talked about alcohol one time. We worked all 12 steps, and we never talked about alcohol or drugs or anything, because at this point in my sobriety, I was 5 years sober. Alcohol wasn't on my radar. It was my unprincipled behavior that was on the radar. It was my lack of reliance on God. It was lack of relationship. It was the way I treated people. I was as selfish and self-centered as I'd ever been prior to coming into Alcoholics Anonymous, and suddenly I found myself back where I was in 2013. Lonely, sad, and thinking if I die in my sleep, I'm okay with it. And when Anthony walked through those steps with me, he did something that no one had ever done before. And I don't know, this is where I said, I'm just going to share my experience. But I think he sensed something in me, and when we went through the steps, he sprinkled a little bit of the Bible into it. And for those of you who are afraid, don't worry, I'm not going to go off onto that. This ain't going to turn into that, I promise. But it's just what I went through. And some of those things sort of like took root in me, because of what I had realized in that step work with Anthony is that when I came into the rooms, I couldn't stop drinking for many years, and I tried. And suddenly I got with you folks, and you taught me a new way, and you showed me these things, and you had this God that I adopted, and the drink was removed. That's a miracle. And I gave it to him. Thank you, God, for this miracle. Oh, but this over here, how to show up for work, how to be a good husband, how to be honest, I got that. But no, thank you for the miracle of not drinking. But I got the other stuff. And I didn't know till that moment, I didn't realize it when I went back through this book again with him, these things that weren't in there the first time I went through it. And the first 100 times I read it with sponsees, all of a sudden there was this stuff in there. You know, step 2 talks about I can have all of the morals and philosophical knowledge, but it's not enough to keep me sober. But then Bill mentions it again in the 3rd step. We can have all the morals and philosophical we want, but we can't do it, right? And I'm paraphrasing. What I realized is that I had given God the easiest thing and kept the hard stuff. So I began to look at things completely different. I began to actually seek God's will in my life. It's mentioned in the book, see where religious people are right. It says it in the book. It's not me. And what I found was these things that would poke out through the book, like we never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. When I went through We Agnostics, it uses the word, hang on, I got to highlight 50 times, not just reason, but prejudice 7 times. My whole life was prejudice. God, you can take the alcohol, but you can't figure my work out. A prejudice is an idea with no basis, and I had a ton of them. So along with this new idea, I began to go to church. I began to also all in on AA. I've always been all in on AA. But I sort of had this new, I don't know, I can't explain it. There was this fire that got lit in me, because what I realized along with, hey, give God the alcohol but keep everything else, is that for me, in my experience, what happened is when I found God at 18 months, 2 years sober, It was a God of my creation. I was talking to my ideas. I was talking to my definition. Because I didn't know how to imagine the creator of the universe. How do you? I don't even know where that starts. And what happens when you're doing that, when I'm doing that, what happens is I'm seeking contentment in every which way but God. I'm seeking contentment through possessions. I'm seeking contentment through validation from women. I'm seeking contentment in money. I'm seeking contentment in all these things, and I just want it and I want it, and it never comes true. It never lasts. I go buy the thing that I really, really wanted, and within 2 weeks it's just the thing that I wanted. I had never had actual peace, joy, and contentment in my life, and I didn't know what it felt like, what it looked like. I had no idea. So post blow up, I began this new journey. I began looking at God completely different. Because what happened is that I had this idea that I called God, 3 letters, G-O-D, and what began to happen is through experience and through things in Alcoholics Anonymous, it became a foundation for me. It became more than an idea. It became something that I can rest my life on. When I was struggling through this, God would show up in the weirdest of ways. I love the meetings I go to, right? I will set a routine of meetings, and I really like it because y'all like me. Right, so I come to a meeting long enough that maybe I'll get called on if I share good, right? Y'all like me, y'all say hello, so I need to be there so y'all don't drink, okay? I need to be there. But I think we get that way, right? We have the meetings we like. And I remember I'm sponsoring this kid, and he's going to lead an Ask It basket, and I'm just not a fan, right? I'm not a big fan of it. There's nothing wrong with it, I'm just not a fan. And it's on a Friday night when I do my Friday night meeting. And it's not where my Friday night meeting is, and y'all aren't there, and I don't really want to go do his Ask It basket. And I was like, okay, God, I'll do it for you. And I go to the Ask It basket meeting. And it was hateable. Right? I predicted that. It was hateable. But at the beginning of the meeting, I don't know if anybody here has ever been to the KD 12 and 12. At the beginning of the meeting, they kind of have a big room, and then they have this pole, and there's kind of this galley in the back. But at the beginning of the meeting, I saw somebody walking. Caught my eye, I don't know why. End of the meeting, everybody passes up their permission slips, and I'm signing permission slips, and I see when I went, Greg, I know this guy. So my buddy Greg, who I grew up with, 2 doors down for 18 years when I was growing up, had been in prison for a little over 10 years. And because I did something against what I wanted to do, when I went and did that meeting, I got to be at his first meeting after getting out of prison. He got to see my face, I got to see his face, and I got to be there for him, which had nothing to do with me and my stupid meeting schedule. God began showing up. And I wasn't trying to find him anymore. I was just open to whatever experience he had for me. I had another experience. I lived in West Chase at the time. And I had another sponsee get a chip. Sponsees are a real problem. We should probably talk about that for a minute. They want us to do stuff and spend our time. Anyways, he was going to the Avenue B meeting on a Tuesday. It was a men's meeting way over in Bel Air, and I live in West Chase, and it was really cold outside, but I said, fine, I'll go. I'm a good kid. I'll go give you your chip. So I go to that meeting, and we do the whole meeting, and everything's great, and outside we're talking, and there's a couple of people. There's a guy that was his first time at that meeting, and we're just kind of chatting. And it's like 32 degrees outside. And I see him go to the bushes and pick up a bicycle. Like, bro, it's 30, you're riding a bike? Yeah, that's the only way to get here. Bro, throw it in my truck. I'll take you home. Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you, man. Thank you. Throw it in my truck. And we're heading toward my house. And I'm like, bro, where do you live? He's like, right up here. So remember, I live in West Chase. That's like Gessner and Westheimer. We're in Bel Air. The guy lived on the street behind my house. How does this happen? How does it happen? When I begin living for something outside of myself, when I begin actually seeking, he shows up. And he begins to use me in ways that I never could have imagined. And it's amazing. Everything began to change for me. I started showing up at work different. At the beginning of the third step promises is that we had a new employer. And I started showing up at work like God is my employer. Let me tell you something. I've been doing it for like 31 years now, and it's kind of embarrassing. But let's say like 25 of them, I had to outwork everybody, outthink everybody. I've got this lane, but I'll work all 8 of them because you can't do your job. I started showing up at work different. All right, God, you're the boss. And he made it simple. Do what they ask you to do and be helpful. I've never really, in my career, gotten promotion offers. But when I began to do that after that 3rd year, remember that 3rd year I wanted to, become a barber and leave my whole, and there's nothing against barbers. The reason I chose being a barber is they are steeped in tradition and trade and, love it. Anyways. Going through this after that 3rd year, I stayed where I was for another 5 and turned on 7 promotions. That's not because of me, that's because of y'all. That's because I had a new employer. I was showing up differently. For the first 3 years of that employment, my boss would sit me down for my yearly review and she would say, hey, outstanding, but we got to talk about your people skills. But that 4th year, she said, I don't know what's happened to you. I don't know what's happened to you, but you're different. And I said, God happened to me. And I had blown up marriage number 2 after 18 years. And then God sends me this little angel. We met, she had 14 or 15 months. I might have had over 5 years. But that's not 13 stepping because she was about double my spirituality. So she'd been through the steps, she was sponsored. I wasn't clear about that. But I began to show up different in a marriage. I began to look outside of it less. Right? It's all a journey. It takes time. But I began to ask God to help me show up in a way that he would have me show up for his daughter. At 45 years old, I started doing dishes. And I'm a dude. I started doing laundry. I started cooking. I don't know why. Sometimes I wish I didn't. But I do it. And honest to God, what happened, honestly, when we got together, Heather had been in sober living and all that for a long time, Ryan. Now we're in a house. And she had some learning to do to get back in them cleaning skills, right? And I'm so spiritual that I begrudgingly was going to show her. And so I started doing it. This is how you do dishes. This is how you do vacuuming and laundry. And here's what happened, is that God took that and he humbled me. And I began to enjoy it. Now, she cleans like an OCD maniac nowadays, but you know what I mean? He will take my buffoonery and use it for his good. And that's what he did. And so suddenly work is better, and home is better, and I'm showing up in ways that I have never shown up. There was probably my favorite page in the 12 and 12. We have any 12 and 12 haters, I'm sorry. Probably my favorite page in the 12 and 12 is page 53. And page 53 talks about being a partner among partners, worker among workers. And it opened my eyes when I read it, because I was never a worker among workers. I struggled to be at the top of the heap, the best, running the show, or I didn't want any part of your stupid game. And when it talked about being a partner among partners, like friend among friends, I had no idea what that meant. And when I read it, my buddy Matt came to mind. So every now and then, we may not talk to each other for a bit, and Matt would call me and ask how I'm doing. I thought that was really nice of him thinking about me like that. When I realized I never called him. I never checked on him. We didn't have a partnership. We had a sales relationship. He would offer me stuff and I would buy it or not, and that was about it. And I began to really look at that. I don't know. Everything has changed in my life because of Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything has changed in my life. And I failed to mention it today, but I want to be very clear that through all of my debauchery, through all of my buffoonery, through all of the damage that I caused between 4 and 5 years sober, I truly believe in my heart that the reason I didn't drink is because I was in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was working at least steps 1 and 12. Right? Not much in between, but I was sponsoring dudes, which means I was sacrificing my time for others, and I honestly believe that that's the only cushion that kept me away from a drink at 4.5 years sober. It's so important to do these things that we do in my life because it's what keeps me close to God. I'll finish with this. I have one more story, and this, guys, I'm a buffoon. I would call myself a skeptic, but that's letting me off the hook easily. I struggle still today with the God idea. And I follow a foundational religion with an idea and all that stuff behind it, right? But I still struggle. And I wonder if he's there, and I wonder if he's listening. So I went to this place in the Heights, and the reason I talk about sponsorship, the reason I'm going to talk about this is everything I've learned. Like, I learned some real nuggets from my sponsors over the years. I've learned some really, really good nuggets, but what I've really learned is through sponsoring other men. Honestly, that's where I've learned it, because every time I take another man through the steps, guess who's working them by proxy? And God will point out something in some random step almost every time for me to look at. So I take this sponsee to EQ Coffee in the Heights. I really liked EQ Coffee. It's like this old Victorian house, and it had this deck that wrapped around the front, up the side, and in the back, there's a back parking lot. In the back, there's this little alcove. And so you got privacy, and so I liked going to meet guys there, because let's be honest, some newcomers, you don't really want them to come to the house right off the bat. You know what I'm saying? Let's meet them in a coffee shop a few times and make sure that they're not a serial killer. Speaking from experience, I was that guy. So we're sitting in that alcove. I went inside the coffee shop, get a coffee, and I had noticed a lady sitting in there, and I'm not going to lie, it's probably the yoga pants, but I noticed her sitting inside, just kind of caught my eye. And I go back out, and I'm sitting with this guy, and we're working steps 2 and 3 that day. And I'm trying to explain to him that you just need to make a start. Like, God is real, and even if you don't believe in him, he's there. And let's go through the motions, and if you just got to be willing, and we're talking about God, and he says to me, he goes, man, look, I don't think you understand what I've done in my life. And I don't believe God will ever forgive me. And man, I like felt it. And so we sit there talking a little while longer, and we get through the book, and now we're just kind of chit-chatting. And Yoga Pants walks by. And she goes out to the parking lot, and she just stops. And I don't know why it caught my eye, and I'm like, that's weird. And she's standing in the middle of the parking lot. And so I continue talking to my guy. She all of a sudden turns around and beelines and comes back up and goes right to him. And she said, God would not let me leave here until I tell you that he loves you and he forgives you. Let me tell you something. I don't think that was for him. I think God knew I was struggling. And I came home and I told Heather, and I just bawled like a baby. I said, I can't believe what he did for me today. That he would show up for me that way and reinforce that he's here and he's in my life. None of this would be possible, y'all, without you, without these rooms. None of it. I owe my life to Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's a debt that I will never pay back. And I don't want to. I want to pay it for the rest of my life, because I have never felt more periods of joy, peace, and contentment than I do today because of this program, because of God, and y'all got me to him. So I'll finish with this out of the big book. It's really quick. I don't want to go over. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient. And that's my story. I came in here completely unequipped and inadequate. And today God has fit me to be of maximum service to him and his kids. And I have y'all to thank you. Thank you.